So in this video, I'm going to have a look at Daniel's latest discussion of before the children allegedly went missing. So that covers the days leading up to, and of course the Friday morning. However, if you're following my channel, then you probably know that I've already done a rather extensive video yesterday where I spoke about Thursday afternoon and Thursday evening and the massive inconsistencies between Malaya, Janie and Daniel's stories. So that part is discussed here in this video, but as far as my comments on it, they will be somewhat brief. They will be more of a Cliff Notes version of what I shared in yesterday's video. I do recommend watching yesterday's video. I will add the link in the description for this video because there was quite some revealing things that I discovered from comparing statements from Malaya, Janie and Daniel. Okay, so focusing back on this video, there are changes to the narrative here, and I think most significantly, Daniel is pulling out all the stops in terms of trying to throw Malaya under the bus and trying to shift attention back onto her. Now, if you caught my last two videos, then you'll know that my approach to this particular interview is a little bit different from my usual approach. Because not only am I discussing the interview and analysing what is being said here, but I'm also pulling out past interviews, information from documents, and information from mainstream media, in order to basically highlight Daniel's lies and the inconsistencies, and of course the changes to his narrative. Because I get the impression that he thinks by doing this interview that he's going to, first of all, convince people that he's innocent, also that he's going to be able to shift attention back onto Malaya, but it also seems that he thinks that by doing this interview he's going to convince everyone that there's nothing to see here anymore, folks, just forget about it, walk away, don't look at this case anymore. And I've said this countless times, but I will keep saying it for people like Daniel so that they can understand. I'm here for the duration. I'm here till Jack and Lily are found. And I'm here until whoever is responsible for what happened to these children is held accountable and faces justice. So Daniel can try to gaslight people. He can try to throw Malaya under the bus. He can try to change his narrative to basically convince people of a new version of the story to fix the mistakes that he's previously made. The things that people have questioned and said, well, this makes no sense. But he's got me and no doubt several other creators who aren't going anywhere to contend with. So on that note, let's just jump into this.
So, let's back up. Let's go and start from the beginning. The kids missed school before their disappearance. A lot of people were looking at that in a suspicious manner. I know that they were seen on camera the day before they disappeared. So the fact that they were missing, as as weird as it was, as far as the timing goes, doesn't necessarily mean something nefarious happened. But tell us, why weren't they in class?
Well, I know Wednesday they had what they call a PE day, which is kind of like an in-service,
Mm-hmm.
and so no children attended the school that day. And then on Thursday, Lily had a cough, and I really didn't know if Malaya was going to keep them home for Friday, but kind of turns out that she did.
So this is a new addition to the narrative, that he didn't know if Malaya was going to keep them home for Friday, but it turns out she did. So before I explain why that is complete utter BS, let me first explain why, in my opinion, he added this bit of information. So, first of all, let's talk about his attempts to make Malaya look like the villain here. Logically, you could say, well, if the children had gone to school, they would not have vanished. And you can see in this interview that he is once again stepping up his efforts to discredit Malaya in every way that he possibly can. So what he's doing here is, wasn't my decision. I would have had them go to school. Look at Malaya, don't look at me. She's the irresponsible parent here. And if she hadn't allowed them to stay home, if she hadn't decided to keep them home, well, they wouldn't have gone missing. This is Daniel's reasoning, in my opinion. But the other thing, and this is what I think is the main reasoning behind him coming up with this statement, is that right now he's fighting for access to Meadow. Now, I think we can be pretty confident that neither him or Malaya will get custody of Meadow for a very, very long time if they ever get custody of her again. But one of the things that CPS is going to be looking at in terms of Meadow is what was going on with Lily and Jack. And one of the things that we're hearing is that they missed a lot of school. That is something that CPS would definitely be paying close attention to. So what Daniel's doing here is laying that on Malaya. Wasn't his decision. This way he can tell CPS, well, no, this was all about Malaya. She's the one who allowed it, not me. If I had my way, they wouldn't have missed school. So for him, this is a 2-for-1. It's let's make Malaya look worse. Let's try and turn people against Malaya. And also, let's try and make sure that in terms of this fight with CPS, that I look like the responsible parent. So thanks to the many, many interviews that he's done, there are certain behaviours that Daniel does that we now know, based on past behaviour, that are tells for him. One of his biggest tells is when he's saying something and you get this pause and the tongue sticks out, works the lips a little bit and goes back in. We know that he's being dishonest or disingenuine, or that there is something about that particular topic that is causing a little bit of anxiety for him, which is pretty much connected with him being dishonest or not really all that genuine about what he is expressing. So what's interesting here is that he says that they were kept home because Lily had a cough, and you get the pause and the tongue comes out and works the lips. We have heard also that he mentioned that, oh, by the way, on the Thursday before they went missing, Lily got a black eye, which of course, according to him, was an accident. It was a Tonka truck hitting her in the face. But the fact that he offered it up like that tells me that when they looked at the CCTV footage from Dollarama, that they probably would have been able to see that Lily had a black eye. So him licking his lips after saying that they kept them home because Lily had a cough, combined with this statement of, oh, and she managed to get a black eye on the Thursday before they went missing, says to me that actually the children were probably kept home because Lily had a black eye. And that the cough story was basically to avoid any more attention on them from CPS. Because we know that despite Daniel's claims of various reasons, like one is like, oh, they wanted to talk to us about an autism assessment, and I think his other claim was, oh, they were just coming to tell us how we can access support. That's not the role of CPS. CPS would have attended the house to investigate the living conditions. When it comes to the kind of support in terms of accessing services like getting the children assessed for autism, etc., that comes down to school social workers, school counsellors. That is not going to be a reason for CPS workers to turn up at the house for a visit. Okay, so let's go back to this comment that he really didn't know if Malaya was going to keep them home for Friday. Well, that is, as I said, complete utter BS. And I'm going to explain to you why. First of all, so we have this statement here from Daniel where he had an email telling him that Malaya had marked the kids absent from school on his phone around 6:18 a.m. Now, him saying that she marked them absent on his phone tells me everything I need to know. So, what do we know about this relationship between Daniel and Malaya? I think it would be fair to say that he is a controlling narcissist and that it is a coercive and, at the very least, emotionally abusive relationship. Now, if the many, many comments that have been made by Janie and Daniel over the last 5 months about Malaya, where they are basically just hammering on her and just completely doing their best to make her look like a complete incompetent fool, not just as a mother but as an individual. If they're anything to go by, then we know what the relationship would have been like between them for the 2 years that they were living together. He was the person with power in that relationship. He clearly spent a lot of time dragging Malaya down, making her feel like she was less than worthwhile. We know that he moved her from her grandmother's house, where she was able to have contact with her family, with her friends, with Belinda, etc. We know that he took her from that environment and moved her into his mother's house, where he basically didn't allow her to have people go and visit her. He didn't allow her to give Belinda the address. We've heard Janie say, like it was a badge of honour, that none of Malaya's friends ever visited her there. Well, that is a classic isolation tactic. He took her away from her support structure and he isolated her. Malaya had no autonomy. She didn't even have her own vehicle until April. We've heard from her grandmother, Connie, who said that Daniel would take her phone off her. Trust me, that is such a typical move in these types of relationships. We've heard from Wade Paris, who said that it was an abusive relationship, it was a controlling relationship. And without realising that they were doing so, Janie and Daniel have actually confirmed this themselves with their own comments. We heard from Malaya's friend Cheryl, and it was confirmed by Daniel's cousin Logan, that after the big argument in the driveway, when after that Malaya left, that there was another argument, and that argument centred around Malaya's car and Malaya's phone, which to me says that Daniel wasn't going to hand over either one. We know that the car was towed, and I would put money on the fact that basically he refused to hand over the keys for that vehicle, and so the only option was to get it towed. So where am I going with this? Quite simply, Malaya would not have been allowed to make that decision over whether or not the children were going to school that day herself. That decision would have had to have been made by Daniel. This is a typical coercive relationship where he is 100% in control. even down to the point where the attendance had to be done on his phone. Do you think she would have been allowed to just help herself to his phone? No. It was set up that way so he can have full control over anything to do with their schooling. Obviously, he got the email. It's set up with him as the email contact, meaning if there are issues, if there are questions over welfare with the children, it goes to him. He gets to stay in control. So him claiming that he really didn't know if Malaya was going to keep them home is complete utter BS. There's no way that in a relationship like that she would have been allowed that sort of autonomy, that she would have been allowed to make the decision herself to keep those children home. It is classic behaviour in an abusive relationship. Malaya would not have been allowed to make any independent decisions.
And when I woke up that morning, like, I wasn't expecting the kids to be home. I seen Lily poke her head into the room a couple times that morning.
Yeah.
And she didn't have a cough. She wasn't sick, not like the day before.
So he's given separate accounts here. On one hand, he has said that Lily kept coming into the room, and here he's saying she kept sticking her head in. And then he makes this comment that she didn't have a cough. She wasn't sick like she was the day before. Now, in all the other statements we've heard, the reference has been that she had a cough and they kept her home just to be sure. Now he's escalated it to she had a cough and she was sick. But honestly, so from her sticking her head in the room 2 or 3 times, and in this account not even coming into the room, you could tell that she didn't have a cough. You could tell that she wasn't sick. This, again, is a new part of the narrative, and he's throwing it in yet again to throw Malaya under the bus. Don't look at me. I would have sent them to school. Lily wasn't even sick. This is definitely intended to discredit Malaya, and also clearly intended to help him out with this whole CPS thing.
So, I wouldn't really have kept them home because they were kept home a lot because they were sick a lot during the school year. But
Allergies, or is this like
no, they just had low immune systems, Daniel.
Okay.
I mean, for like the first, I don't know, like 11 weeks of school, they were sick each week. Not they brought home COVID and stuff like that. Well, but you can't expect a kid to be perfectly healthy when they're hanging out with other children, right?
I have so much to say about this. First of all, note the language here. He says they were kept home a lot. Note how he's separating himself from that decision. He's not saying we kept them home a lot. He's not even saying Malaya kept them home a lot. He's just saying they were kept home a lot. We're not going to tell you who it was that decided to keep them home a lot, because I don't want to involve myself in this. I don't want to include myself in this action of keeping them home. So it's just a general, they were kept home a lot. Again, it's this attempt to throw Malaya under the bus, but, and I've said this in previous videos, he's being a little bit cautious about how he does it. And I'm guessing that goes back to what I was saying with a while ago, Malaya had the RCMP contact Belinda and tell her to stop talking about me in a bad way or something like that. And I'm willing to bet that Belinda wasn't the only person contacted by the RCMP saying you have to stop being horrible about Malaya. So I think he's been given a warning. But not only that, so he's trying to make people believe that this is all about Malaya, that he has no part of this whatsoever. Hence, they were kept home a lot. The passive, they were kept home, not we kept them, I kept them. And of course, the other reason why he's not going to turn around and say Malaya kept them home a lot is because clearly it would be an outright lie. What I was saying before about who gets to make the decisions in that household, not Malaya. So his brain stopped him from saying an outright lie. He didn't want to make himself look responsible by saying, I kept them home a lot. He didn't want to use we because that still puts responsibility on him. But he couldn't say Malaya did it because it would be a lie. And his brain went, yep, no, can't do that. But again, like I said, he's probably been given a warning also. And once again, this goes back, I believe, to the CPS investigation. If he has told them that it wasn't his decision to keep the children home, then in his mind, that puts him in a better position to get custody of Meadow. Now, let's talk about them being sick each week for about the first 11 weeks. So I'm going to take a guess here and say that, for starters, he's probably underestimating that. But not only that, when he says they were sick a lot during the school year, guess what you get straight after he says that? Yep, you get the lizard moment again. The tongue pops out, works its way around the lips and hops back in again. So they weren't sick. They were kept home for other reasons, I would imagine, based on his reaction. Now, I can tell you now, a child whose needs are being met at home is not going to be missing school every week. A child whose needs are being met at home is likely to have barely any absences throughout the entire school year. And trust me, and even if they're only having 1 day off a week, that is massive. That is really significant. So the claim that they have low immune systems, if these children were getting ill frequently, then that is definitely an issue for CPS. That probably connects with what we're hearing about teachers having to give them warm clothes at school. Probably connects with what we're hearing about them going to school dirty. And it certainly raises questions over whether or not their nutritional needs were being met. Now let's talk about this comment of them being sick each week for about the first 11 weeks of school. Meaning that it seems to have been a regular thing for them to miss at least 1 day a week. He's basically adding to the picture of neglect here without realising that he is doing so. Now, I just want to briefly talk about the attendance policy for schools in Nova Scotia. So if these children were missing a minimum of 1 day a week, then that puts their absences to over 20%. That right there is one of the reasons why they were considered to be delayed developmentally. They weren't delayed. They just weren't getting a decent run at their schooling. A child misses 1 day a week, they're not getting the continuity in their learning. They're missing out on crucial learning, especially for children their age. These are the most important years for them, the early childhood years, when they are learning social skills. They are learning how to develop friendships with other children. They are learning how to play cooperatively. They are learning the skills of basically being at school, sitting down and paying attention, sitting at your desk, learning to write, learning to recognise letters, developing speech patterns, participating in activities that are going to help them improve their gross and their fine motor skills. This is a crucial time for children of that age. So to be missing 20% of their schooling is huge. Of course they are going to fall behind. And they are going to continue to fall behind further and further. And without that solid learning foundation, that is setting them up for struggles throughout their entire school career. Now, I think requirements have changed here now, but it used to be that a child did not have to attend school till after their 5th birthday. Meaning that what you were seeing is that you would have some children who would attend kindergarten and then some children who would be in school in prep. And when you do the testing in like year 3, you could tell which students had begun in kindergarten and which students had begun in prep. Because those students who began school a year later were the ones that were behind. So when you look at this in terms of attendance, if you have children missing at least one day a week in those early years, in those crucial early childhood learning years, they are going to just get further and further behind. They're going to be the kids that when they have to do testing in grade 3 are going to be far behind their peers and are going to be struggling right through. So because of that, this is something that is recognised universally. We have regulations in Australia. Now, the requirements in many states in Australia, if children are missing 20% in terms of attendance, then the schools are actually allowed to take the parents to court to get a court order that this child be attending school. Now, I looked through and I couldn't see anything quite the same as that in Nova Scotia. But what I have found here is this is their policy. So, Provincial Student Attendance and Engagement Policy, this is what it's talking about. And this is talking about ongoing communication between the school and home and promoting regular attendance. Now, I'm just going to go look at 15%, which is less than what Lily and Jack were missing. And it says that once we're up to 15%, there need to be targeted interventions. And these consist of connecting the student or family with counsellors, school psychologists, school support workers, mental health clinicians. Essentially, children missing 20% of their schooling is not normal. It is not something to be nonchalant about. It is something that requires intervention. And those interventions that I was talking about were for 15%. Now, when you start to couple 20% absenteeism with children coming to school with inadequate clothing, with inadequate food, coming to school dirty and coming to school with black eyes, then you've got some major issues here. So while Daniel is trying to play it down and also trying to distance himself from it, not his decision. They were kept home a lot. Not we kept them home a lot. It's the passive thing. They were kept home. For all we know, could have been Janie's dog that chose to keep them home. Because he's not giving specifics here. But this is a huge, huge red flag. And he's basically trying to dismiss it as, oh, this is just normal. This happens with kids when they go to school. They get germs. They have time off school. It's no big deal. It's huge.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so it sounds like she was pretty bad the day before she went missing on Thursday.
Yeah, she did have a cough, but I was never expecting Malaya to keep them home for both days.
So he's already forgotten that he added in the bit about her being sick. And so this turkey guy has said, so, you know, she was quite bad. And he went, yeah, well, you know, she had a cough. But I wasn't expecting Malaya to keep her home for both days. So he's essentially saying that she wasn't all that bad, that she had a cough for one day, allegedly. And again, he puts the focus back on Malaya. He wasn't expecting her to keep them home for 2 days. He's trying to give the impression here that, yeah, no, I really wouldn't have approved of that. Had I known it was going to happen, I wouldn't have approved of it. Like I said, complete utter BS. Everything we know about this relationship tells me that if Malaya wanted to jump, she had to first ask Daniel how high she was allowed to jump. I mean, they're her children, but the email about their attendance, that goes to Daniel. This guy has been 100% in control for the entire time that they were living on that property. And like I said before, this is the first time when he's basically put the absence back on Malaya. He's trying to give the impression that he knows how to be a responsible parent, and he never would have done this. Malaya did it without consulting with him. Malaya did it without letting him know that that's the choice she was going to make. Like I said, we know that's complete utter BS.
And so that was Malaya's decision then to keep.
Yeah,
them
of course.
home.
She woke up that morning on the morning of the disappearance and marked Jack and Lily both as absent at 6:17 and 6:18 a.m.
Because she called the school at 6:18 exactly.
Malaya called the school twice, once at 6:17 and never got through, and once at 6:19. But this is what I talk about, little particulars that mean nothing to me.
Now, okay, but Daniel told me that Thursday she called the school at 6:17.
Yeah, one was Thursday, one was Friday.
Right. Friday she called the school at 6:18.
I probably should have given you a trigger warning to let you know that you were going to hear Dimwit's voice there. But what I was showing you there, Daniel is claiming that he marked them absent at 6:17 and 6:18. He's forgotten the actual details. He's forgotten the narrative. Because as we hear from Belinda, which was confirmed by Kent, even though I do have some questions about Kent as to where he's come from, how come he is so much in the know, all these things, how come he shares a surname with Janie's sister-in-law. But the point here is Belinda herself is saying Daniel told her that on the Thursday they were marked absent at like 6:17, and on the Friday they were marked absent at 6:18. So he's basically screwed up his narrative again here. And yes, I know Belinda said she called in and said they were sick, but this is coming from the perspective of a grandmother. someone who is thinking back to the school system when her children were that age. So in her mind, the marking them absent is the same as what you would have done when Cody and Chelsea were children, and that is basically calling the school. I mean, we're talking about a time when they were children, you wouldn't have emailed the school to say they were absent. You wouldn't have had a school app where you go in and mark your child as absent. The only way you could do it would be to either send a note the day before saying that we have something important going on, so my children won't be here, or phoning the school on the morning when they're not there because, we haven't had any pre-warning. The thing that's significant here is that basically Daniel has screwed up his own narrative yet again.
Good deal. And so the last time that they're seen is on camera the day before. What happened the night after they're seen on camera? What was that night like?
The night they were seen on camera, they were seen on Thursday. They were seen at Dollarama, and then we went to Acropole. We got some food and then brought it home. When we got home, it was a little bit before 4:00, and I went outside and I helped Mom work on the fence. It took me a little while to find all my tools and stuff, but then after I got my drill and everything else, and I helped Mom work on the fence for quite a few hours until it was just coming on to dark. And then after it was dark, I came back inside. What I remember, the kids were sleeping, but when you're looking back in time, Daniel, it's hard to, kind of remember everything and get a feeling for how the night really was, because it just seemed like a normal night, right? When I came inside, I thought the kids were sleeping, and I could have swore they were sleeping, but it says in the documents that she had them up till 9 or 10 at night. I don't remember them being up that late, so I'll tell you that.
Now, I did a rather extensive video on this yesterday, so if you didn't catch it, the link will be in the description so that you can go and watch it. And I will just give you a Cliff Notes version of what I discussed in relation to what he's just said here. His account doesn't match with Janie's or Malaya's. According to Janie, she just had him help her by holding the rails at the other end so she could hammer them on at her end, meaning that he didn't really need to go and collect any tools from anywhere because all he was doing is standing there holding a rail. She also said that basically after he helped her with that, she continued working on the fence. Janie doesn't refer to Daniel returning inside at any point in time. Malaya doesn't refer to Daniel being outside or inside, other than when she talks about him coming to bed sometime after she was asleep. Janie places the children outside before she'd even gone outside to begin raking the driveway, and she claims the children were still outside when she went inside for supper, and she doesn't know what time they went inside. Malaya thinks that maybe they went outside for a little while, and then she says that they came in around the time that it was getting dark. So she contradicts herself. On one hand, it's, well, maybe they went outside, and then it's making it definite because she's saying this is when they came inside. But Daniel claims that he came inside after it was dark, and he thought the children were sound asleep, which doesn't fit with Janie's narrative or Malaya's narrative, because if Daniel came inside and Janie continued to work on her fences, that means that Janie was working on fences in the dark and apparently the children were still outside. There's also a hole in Daniel's narrative because he refers to he helped Janie for several hours, which by my calculation is something like 4.5 hours, to put in place between 6 and 10 rails, which with two people should take less than an hour. But essentially, Daniel claims to have been helping Janie up until it was starting to get dark. But then he went inside when it was dark. So you've got like about a half-hour period of time where who knows what he was doing. We have Malaya also being kind of vague about what time the children went to bed. Might have been 9 o'clock, might have been 10 o'clock. Who knows? She gives different times with different accounts. So it seems like when it comes to the children, the narrative starts to become very, very hazy from around the children apparently went outside on Thursday afternoon. After that, none of the narratives match, and nobody seems to really know when the children went inside or if the children went inside, even if you look at Daniel's narrative, because he thought they were in bed. Anyway, that's pretty much the Cliff Notes version of it, so I do recommend watching the video that I put out yesterday because I really go in depth in it, and you will see all the problems with their timelines.
Were you looking at your phone or your watch at what time it was every few
Yeah.
minutes?
I mean, I got a watch on my arm the whole time, and I never look at it, man. I'm always grabbing for my phone.
You know, it's not uncommon unless you're like something specifically happens and you look at the time at that specific time. You know, I know a lot of people are looking at certain times where I think they were asleep by 9:30, and then documents say 10, and like, oh my God, there's 30 minutes here that's
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a wild expectation for people to expect to remember things, especially on, like you mentioned, on a night that was pretty normal.
Okay, so let's start by acknowledging the fact that this content creator actually doesn't know the case. Because if you go and look in the documents, you can see that you have different statements from Malaya. One statement is that she believes she put the children to bed around 9 o'clock. Another statement is that she believes she put them to bed around 10 o'clock. 9:30 is not mentioned, and it seems to me that he either doesn't know the case well enough to know what the actual times are, because he mentions the 9 o'clock, 9:30, and says, oh, and in the documents it says 10. Well, there is nothing anywhere that says 9:30, and it's 9 and 10 in the documents. So that straight up shows that this guy is not actually taking the time to properly research this case by the looks of it. But he's also essentially giving Daniel a free pass here. I actually feel embarrassed for this guy over just how much he is sucking up to Daniel here. He's basically saying, oh, it's okay if you don't know what time it is. You know, people don't notice the time unless something significant is happening. Well, here's the thing. Daniel, and I said this in yesterday's video, Daniel has given this account to investigators multiple times. He has admitted that they interviewed him multiple times. So if he's sticking with this story that he came inside when it got dark, then that's not hard to check up on. If you remember that you came inside when it got dark and you're telling this narrative to detectives repeatedly, for starters, a good detective is going to go, so that would have been probably around 9 o'clock then? Because it basically sunset around then was like 8:30ish. So if we allow roughly half an hour for it to actually get dark, that places it around 9:30. It makes it pretty easy to figure out a time. But instead this turkey guy's like, well, unless something is specifically happening, you're not expected to remember the time. Yes, but you've gone through this timeline multiple times before you get to this retelling. Detectives would have clarified the time with you. You gave a very specific marker in terms of time. You came inside when it got dark. Makes it pretty easy to figure out the time. And then Daniel's like, oh, I wear a watch, but I never look at it. I'm always grabbing for my phone, which is a complete lie because, again, he does the lizard thing straight after he says phone. Sticks the tongue out, licks the lips. And I actually think that given how much of a controlling personality Daniel has, that watch isn't just there for decoration, but that he does look at the time. That said, I think in this instance, where he's saying, talking about essentially giving himself an excuse for not knowing the time, I think probably the tongue thing in this instance is probably because he is avoiding being truthful. Because I believe that something happened before he came inside that night. And I've discussed that in the video that I did yesterday. Now, like I said, this turkey guy hasn't really done his research. And he's completely dismissing the fact that Malaya's timeline is different in the two different accounts that she gives. There's an hour discrepancy there. When it comes to something like this, especially when she is specifically saying that she believes it was 9 o'clock, it's not her saying, I'm not sure, I can't remember, maybe it was around this time, but she gave a specific time. And then she changed it. In the next account she gave, she said 10 o'clock. There's a reason they say that to be a good liar, you have to have a good memory. It's not just a random thing. So the fact that her statement has changed over with a gap of a few days in between, to me that is significant. And it seems to me like this turkey guy, if he's not as ignorant as he's sounding, and he actually does know that it was 9 o'clock, then is he shortening the time frame to minimise the fact that she's changed her story? Because everything this turkey guy is saying here is basically intended to minimise the discrepancies in their stories. Oh, you know, your times don't match, your statements don't match, but that's okay, you can't be expected to know these things. And while this turkey guy is doing his best to minimise and dismiss the inconsistencies from Malaya, in between all that, you get another lizard tongue from Daniel. So this turkey guy's like, 9:30, and then the documents say 10, and Daniel does this lizard thing with his tongue. And he's like, 30 minutes. It's a wild expectation to expect people to get that right. Well, dude, we're actually talking about an hour discrepancy, and it shouldn't be that hard to get right when you are already saying very specific times. So why do we get the lizard tongue while the turkey guy is talking about the discrepancy in the times? I suspect this is Daniel telling us, actually, it's all one big fabrication. He appears to be telling on Malaya right there. But we also get the lizard tongue after him saying, I don't remember them being up that late. I'll tell you that. And then you get the lizard tongue again. My observations based on, if you go back and look at yesterday's video and what I was saying, none of their timelines match, none of their accounts match. My thoughts here are that the reason we're getting the lizard tongue here is because Daniel wasn't even in the house around that time. That is my speculation. He does not feature in Malaya's narrative until she mentions that he went to bed sometime after her, but she doesn't know when he went to bed because she was already asleep. Her narrative does not place him in the house at any point on that Thursday evening. Janie's narrative has him essentially evaporating from the point when he is standing at the fence line holding a rail for her so she can hammer the rail in. Daniel's sequence of events, his narrative, doesn't fit at all with what Janie and Malaya have said. So I think the reason we're getting all this lizard tongue happening here is because this is all just a load of BS. The children weren't put to bed that night. Daniel wasn't in the house just after dark. I can't help thinking that since this is where the narrative falls apart, this is when we start getting some major lizard tongue happening, that something must have happened around dusk, just as it was starting to get dark. Because that is something that Malaya and Daniel both throw into their timelines. Malaya's like, oh, the children came inside before it got dark. Daniel has himself coming in just after dark, even though the children were apparently never outside with him. Janie, well, who knows? She went inside and had supper and left the kids outside and doesn't know what time they went in. But to me, it seems like this turkey guy is far too busy massaging Daniel's ego to actually try and ask him any of the hard questions. It also seems that he really hasn't done his research and he doesn't know the case overly well. Now, I mentioned this in yesterday's video also, but this thing of how dismissing it as, you know, it was just a pretty normal night. So how you meant to know all the finer details because it was just a normal night. No, it wasn't just a normal night. Allegedly, this is the last time that Daniel and Malaya really saw these children. Meaning that this is actually quite a significant night. Because when you lose someone, now I can only relate to it in terms of when someone dies, but I'm pretty certain that, you know, in terms of someone going missing and you don't know where they are, it's going to be a similar thing. The last time you see them is ingrained in your brain. And in fact, in terms of someone going missing, I would imagine that you would run that evening beforehand through your brain continuously, trying to find any clues that you may miss. Something that may have been out of the ordinary that you didn't notice. So dismissing it as it was just another ordinary evening shows a complete lack of understanding of the psychology of this kind of thing. It also shows, like I said, a complete lack of understanding of the fact that both Daniel and Malaya have been interviewed multiple times. So by this point, 5 months in, Daniel should have his narrative down pat. He should remember it all because he's given his narrative multiple times. So dismissing the inconsistencies or the gaps in the timeline as, oh, it was just a normal night, you can't be expected, you know, it's a wild expectation to expect you to get it right. No. It is not a wild expectation. It shows a lack of knowledge to suggest that it is a wild expectation to expect people to get it right. Because if they are actually recounting events that occurred, they're not going to keep changing their story over time. They may remember a few things and add them in, but they're not going to change their story over time. Like I said, if Daniel came in just after it got dark, then he should have a pretty good idea of what time that was. Because he would have realised after the first time he told investigators, he would have realised what time it gets dark, the next time it got dark, or investigators, probably having a little bit more intelligence than this turkey guy, would have gone, okay, well, sunset is around 8:30, so you're saying around 9 o'clock there? And they would confirm it. This guy is so delighted to have Daniel on his channel that he's basically giving him a free pass.
But that night, what time did you go to bed?
I went to bed actually a lot later than Malaya did, I think. Like Malaya was already asleep when I came into bed. I remember flicking on the light for the kids at 12 at night, or a little bit after 12, so a little bit after midnight, and both of the kids were fast asleep under the covers. So, but I never get a chance to see what clothing they were wearing because the blankets were up on them, right?
So when Janie is talking, you hear her constantly saying, "Believe me." Well, Daniel's equivalent of that is right. It's a persuasive device. It's like, I'm telling you this thing, right? You have to believe me because I'm being assertive here, right? It is telling the listener, you know what? Believe me. Usually it means that they're not being truthful. Or at the very least, that they are stretching the truth. So the first thing he said is not only an impossible statement, but it also proves that what he said previously is a lie. So he claims he went to bed a lot later than Malaya did. He says, I think. Meaning that he really has no clue whatsoever. And he explains that as saying Malaya was already asleep when I came into bed. Well, that doesn't equate to much later. Maybe she was really tired and she was in bed half an hour before you and crashed out. But here's why it proves that his previous statement is a lie. He claimed that he went inside just after it got dark, which means that he was inside by around 9 o'clock. Malaya says that she got the kids to bed first and then she got Meadow sorted and took herself to bed. So her timeline is from somewhere between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock that she got the kids to bed, putting her in bed somewhere between maybe 9:30, 10:30, maybe a bit later. Meaning that if Daniel had gone inside at the time that he claims to have gone inside, he would know what time she put the kids to bed and what time her and Meadow went to bed. But he's admitting here he doesn't know what time Malaya went to bed. He's just saying he thinks he went to bed much later than her. But he throws in the I think, meaning I don't know what time Malaya went to bed. Meaning he was not in the house when Malaya went to bed, or this whole narrative is just a complete fabrication. You have Malaya saying she doesn't know what time he went to bed because he stayed up to do chores. But if he's staying up to do chores, that means he's in the house, right? Wouldn't he then know what time Malaya went to bed? He has said he went in when it got dark. That means there had to have been a period of time between when he got inside and when Malaya went to bed. So this statement saying that he went to bed much later than Malaya, he thinks, meaning he's got no idea, proves that he's lying or that it's a fabrication. Sorry, I've got to turn on the fan for a while. 1 month into spring and Bendigo is once again turning out the hot weather. It's a very Mediterranean climate here. So summer's probably about 5 months here in Bendigo. Winter is probably about 6 weeks. So we hit 30 degrees Celsius here today, which is something like 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's before the summer heat kicks in. Okay, so back to talking about Daniel and his timeline. The other thing that is problematic here for his timeline is that it's not linear. So he talks about when he went into bed, but then he backtracks and he says, I remember flicking on the light for the kids at 12 or a little after 12. So he's basically gone to bed and then flicked on the light for the kids. They were in a different room. So his timeline here is not linear. Tells me utter BS. If this was real, then it would be a linear timeline. He would say, well, I think I got to bed around 12. Before I went to bed, I did go and check on the kids. Now, tell me this. Who goes in and turns on a light when children are sleeping? Especially when you have a child like Lily, who is apparently quite a live wire. Because you go in to the bedroom of a child who's a bit of a live wire and you flick the light on, you're going to wake them up. And you're going to spend the next hour settling them back down again. But the way he says it is also extremely odd. And to me, there is some sort of leakage happening there. Because he says that he flicked on the light for the kids. When you say you're doing something for someone, you are saying that they have asked you to do that for them or that they need you to do that for them. If they were asleep in their beds, they wouldn't ask him to turn on the light. They wouldn't need him to turn on the light. So what exactly does he mean here when he says he flicked on the light for the kids? This takes me back to considering my original theory that I had in this case. While the notion that something happened in the driveway does seem quite likely, the original theory that I had with this case relates to that sliding door. Because we get accounts of basically they don't normally shut the sliding door, talking about they're not the sort of kids that we tell them whatever that bizarre thing Malaya was saying. But it seems like at the beginning, in those early statements, it seems like they were pointing to the fact of the children going out and not bothering to shut that sliding door. And I had asked myself early on in the case, because the very first interview I saw with Daniel, I was like, nah, this guy did it. I could tell straight away from his body language, from his fake pretending to cry and then peeking out from under his hand. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I asked myself the question, what could possibly happen that would cause two children to not be alive? What sort of event would happen that would mean that both of them would end up not being alive? And at that time of year, the overnight temperatures were around 1-2 degrees. So my original theory was that with this whole emphasis on the sliding door, that maybe Daniel had locked them out to prove a point. Maybe he got fed up with them leaving that sliding door open. Especially because Meadow would have been getting to that age where she would be starting to walk. And you would be concerned about a little toddler heading out an open door and falling off that deck, which at the time was a death trap for a toddler. We have this additional account of him basically using a wrench to make sure that the front door couldn't get opened. So I did originally have this thought that maybe they were locked outside overnight to prove a point. if you go outside when you're not meant to and you don't shut the door, we're going to shut the door on you, we're going to lock the door. So saying he turned the light on for the kids, could it be that he turned the light on for the kids because they were outside and he turned the outside light on for them before he went to bed as a bit of a concession to the fact that he locked them out? I don't know. It's just throwing that out there as a thought. Because him saying that he turned on the light for the kids doesn't make sense. They were apparently asleep in their room. They didn't ask him to turn the light on. They didn't need him to turn the light on. And like I said, why the heck would you turn the light on and wake the kids up anyway? Especially not at midnight or after midnight. And then the narrative continues to be a little bit awkward. So he just establishes this, well, I never got a chance to see what they were wearing. Both were fast asleep under the covers, he says. And he goes, so he's struggling here to give a fluent account. That first bit sounds reasonable. Both were fast asleep under the covers. Except that you just flicked the light on. I'm surprised they didn't wake up. And then that's when he says he never got a chance to see what they were wearing because the blankets were up on them. It's a weird way of describing them being tucked into bed because the blankets were up on them. And of course he throws in right at the end so you have to believe me, which makes me think, given the awkwardness of his description, given that his narrative isn't linear, and given the right thrown in at the end, that this claim of seeing them at midnight is just a load of BS. To me, that suggests that whatever happened to them definitely happened before midnight. He's like, I'm giving you proof of life here. I even turned the light on. Right? Well, it doesn't ring true for me. Now, in this next part, he's going back to his old style of throwing shade. Basically, giving his audience enough information to make sure that they come to the conclusion that he is pushing them towards. So he's tried Dimwit's technique of just outright lies and trying to say them so confidently that people believe you. And now he's going back for his usual style of giving people enough clues to make sure that they draw the conclusion that he wants them to conclude. I think the reason he's doing it this way is because, once again, it's aimed at Malaya and her family. And like I said, I think that around the time when Belinda got a nasty phone call from the RCMP, that Malaya probably set them onto him also. I also suspect that there may be some sort of agreement that he's been made to accept in terms of his references to Malaya. Because if you remember, there was that time when he just did this about face and he's telling people, enough of picking on Malaya because it's impacting her mental health and it's impacting on Meadow. And it was just a really odd way that he said it, and to me, it made me think he's basically getting into trouble with CPS, and him attacking Malaya is jeopardising his chances to see Meadow. And I think that that's what's going on here. He can't come out, straight out and attack Malaya because it's going to impact on his ability to see Meadow.
Did you see the backpack?
Okay, so just a comment on my editing there. I probably should have watched on a little bit before I paused, because you got the lizard straight after him basically saying the right. So saying I didn't see what they were wearing because the blankets were up on them. Right. And then you get the lizard tongue. So again, that definitely says to me that all this stuff about going in and having a look at them in the room and turning the light on and the blankets were up on them, it's just a whole bunch of hooey.
I don't remember the backpack, the strawberry backpack, but that was always in Lily's room, right?
Okay.
Like
And
that was always in Lily's room. Like she never took it out of there, right? That was her backpack for. It wasn't a school backpack. I know a lot of people think that, but
Yeah.
she actually had a pink LOL doll, like for school, and that was her. And the backpack she ended up taking was the one that we bought for when she took to her grandmother's, right? Which would be Cindy Murray.
So when she goes on trips, this was the backpack for trips.
Yeah. She didn't take her school backpack. She took her one that she takes on trips.
Interesting.
Trips or overnight trips or to go to visit. She would use that backpack.
Interesting.
Can you believe this turkey guy was actually coaching Daniel here? That is unreal. How unethical can you be? You're doing an interview with someone who, no matter what other people like to say, he is a suspect here. He has not been cleared by the Mounties. And why do you think they had the dogs in? If he was cleared, they would not have had those dogs on that property. If he was cleared, Janie wouldn't be slipping up and saying that CPS won't let her see Meadow because of the criminal investigation. He's not been cleared, and yet this guy has him on his channel. He is sucking up to him to the point of being a complete utter sycophant. It's nauseating. And then he's coaching him, helping him to make sure that he gets his narrative right. So the question here is about the backpacks. Did you see the backpack when you stuck your head in and looked in the room that night? And Daniel was like, no. And Daniel turns around and he says, she never took that backpack out of there. Okay? That implies that that is basically just a plaything that does not get taken out of the bedroom. It's not a functional backpack. It's just a plaything that she has in her bedroom. It never gets taken anywhere. But then he does a complete utter turnaround and he said, yeah, that's the one that she uses for when she goes to Cindy's place. And after he says that, after he dumps Cindy in it, we get the lizard tongue again. Now, while he is pushing this story, he's throwing those rights out, left, right and centre. So we get, I think, 3 rights in that whole conversation. He's trying super, super hard to make sure that people believe this story. Because, of course, this is the story that Durwood made up. And it appears that Daniel thinks it's a good story because now he's going to run with it. This is something that he has basically introduced here on the spot. He's taken Darren's story and he's run with it because he's decided it sounds good. Not only that, he's decided it's the perfect opportunity to basically accuse Cindy. And then you get this turkey guy coaching him. So that's the one that when she goes on trips, this is the backpack. He might as well sit there and say, now remember, this is when you've got to say this. And so Daniel runs with it. And he throws in a few extra rights for good measure, just to make sure that he convinces his audience. So he points out, yeah, this is not the school backpack. And then, forgetting that he said she never takes it out of there, he then runs with it. It's like, yeah, but, you know, this is the one for trips or overnight trips when she goes to visit people, or when she goes to visit people. So he is throwing it out here. He wants his audience to listen carefully and to basically grab the story that they've been abducted by someone from Malaya's family, which we know is a complete, utter BS story. We know it is not the case. The only people that seem to think that this story is plausible is Daniel, Janey, Dingbat, and that little handful of drones, to use Janey's word, who are there to help push Daniel's narrative. You know, the ones with sock accounts, or the ones who are definitely family members because they actually use the family name. But, you know, you've got the multitudes of fake accounts who are basically so very definitely doing it on Daniel's behalf. These are the only people that are giving any sort of credence to this narrative, because it is not a logical narrative. The RCMP do not believe that narrative. Belinda does not believe that narrative, and she's their grandmother. It's hard to tell from Malaya's family because they've stayed pretty quiet, but it appears that Cheryl and Hayley certainly don't seem to think that anything like that has happened, even though in one of his accounts, Dingbat seems to be blaming them at one point. So all of a sudden, with a little bit of coaching from his turkey friend, this backpack that she never took out of there is suddenly a backpack for when she's visiting Malaya's family members. And we're supposed to believe that that proves that Malaya handed them off to a family member on the bottom of the driveway and that they're just safely hidden away. Now, just an extra thought in terms of this backpack that she never took out of there. When I think about it, what child is going to just leave something in their bedroom and never take it out of there? I realise that what he's trying to push here is this idea of her never taking it out of the house. And then he adds in the bit that, oh, well, she takes it when she goes on overnight trips and stuff. But to me, I'm thinking, now that I listen again, that it sounds like leakage. She never took it out of there. No, because someone else took it out of there after whatever happened to the children. She never took it out of there because they didn't go off with a family member and get hidden away for 5 months. It makes more sense when you look at it in terms of leakage. She never took it out of there because this whole story is just a whole big fabrication. And because she never took it out of there because whoever took these kids and put them somewhere after they were no longer alive was who took it out of there. But honestly, these people are so low that in order to cover Daniel's ass, they're happy to put out this false narrative that must be causing immeasurable pain for Belinda and for other people who are related to those children or who care about those children and who want to know what happened. And not only was that turkey guy encouraging it, but he was actually coaching Daniel to help him get his narrative right. Now, I'm just going to pre-warn you. It's possible that the next video may take me 2 days to put together, because from memory, the next part of this interview is basically discussing the Friday. And I want to really sink my teeth into that one, which means that I probably will be spending a lot of time going through previous statements, going through documents, going through interviews to really highlight the lies and the inconsistencies. I will do my best to get it out tomorrow, but if you don't see a video tomorrow, you'll know why. You'll know because I'm basically really putting in a lot of time gathering all the bits and pieces together that I need for that video. So that brings us to the end of this video. And of course, if you are new to my channel, please do subscribe. Also, please hit that like button. Gets this video out there into the algorithm, gets it seen by more people. And please do leave a comment below. I enjoy reading your thoughts on this and seeing other people's perspectives. It helps me to see things from many different angles, helps me to narrow in on what I think is actually going on here. Because sometimes, or quite often, people will suggest things that haven't occurred to me. And it just gives me more things to consider, helps create a better picture of what may have occurred. So on that note, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I begin to wonder